Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he worked on the strange alien machine. The communication room of the human ship Horizon's Edge was quiet, except for the soft hum of computers and the occasional beep from his tools. He had been working on this piece of technology for 3 days straight, trying to understand how it worked. The machine came from a dead alien ship they had found floating in space 2 weeks ago. The ship belonged to a race called the Zilani. Nobody had ever seen a living Zilani before. Their home planet had been destroyed by their dying star hundreds of years ago. The only things left of their civilization were empty ships like this one, drifting through space like ghosts. Jake was good with alien technology. He had a gift for understanding how different machines worked, even when they came from species that thought in completely different ways than humans. But this Zilani device was giving him trouble. It looked like some kind of computer, but every time he tried to access its files, the screen would flash strange symbols and then go dark. "Come on," Jake muttered to himself as he tried another approach. He connected his human computer to the alien device using a special cable he had made. The screen flickered to life, showing rows of symbols that looked like a mix of mathematics and poetry. Suddenly, something clicked. The symbols began to make sense, like a puzzle piece falling into place. Jake realized he was looking at a personal computer, something like a diary or journal. His hands moved quickly over the controls as he began to translate the alien writing. The first entry appeared on his screen in broken English, filtered through his translation program. It was dated about 300 years ago, just before the Zilani homeworld died. "My name is Kira. Today, grandmother told me the old stories again. She said our world was once green and beautiful, with blue oceans and silver cities that reached to the clouds. I try to imagine it, but all I see around me is red sky and dying plants. The scientists say we have maybe 10 years before the star kills everything." Jake leaned back in his chair, surprised. This was not what he had expected to find. He had thought the device would contain technical information or star maps. Instead, he was reading the private thoughts of a young alien girl who had lived during her world's final days. He scrolled to the next entry. "I had the dream again last night. In my dream, our world is green and alive like in grandmother's stories. The star is young and bright, not old and angry like it is now. I know it's impossible, but I wish someone could make the dream real. I wish someone could bring back what we lost." Jake found himself drawn into Kira's words. Her writing was simple but full of emotion. She wrote about her daily life, her fears about the future, and her impossible dreams. As he read more entries, he began to understand what life had been like for the Zilani during their final years. "The evacuation ships left today. Grandmother says we will go on one of the last ships next month. She is too old to make the journey, but she wants me to live. I told her I want to stay with her, but she says the young must survive to carry on our memories. I don't want to forget our world, but I'm afraid I will." Jake's throat felt tight as he read about Kira's love for her grandmother and her sadness at leaving everything behind. But what really caught his attention were the technical details hidden in her innocent observations. Grandmother worked late again tonight. She was crying over her calculations. She says they found a way to fix time itself, to make things go backwards, but it's too dangerous. The test yesterday made a crack in space that swallowed a whole moon. The other scientists are too scared to try again. Jake sat up straight. Kira's grandmother had been working on time manipulation technology. This was incredible information. The human scientists had been studying Zilani technology for months, trying to understand their advanced science, but they had never found anything about time travel. He kept reading, finding more clues hidden in Kira's daily observations. "I helped grandmother organize her papers today. She has drawings of machines that can twist time like clay. She says if they had more computing power, they could make it safe. But our computers aren't strong enough to handle all the variables. She says it would take a miracle to make the calculations work." Jake's mind began to race. Human computers were very different from Zilani technology. Maybe they could provide the missing piece of the puzzle. He looked at the timestamp on Kira's entries. She had been writing these just days before her world died. "This is my last entry. Tomorrow we leave on the evacuation ship. Grandmother gave me her research notes and told me to keep them safe. She says maybe someday, someone will be smart enough and brave enough to use them. Maybe someday, someone will grant my impossible wish and bring our world back to life. I know it sounds crazy, but I have to believe it's possible. Hope is all we have left." Jake stared at the screen for a long time after reading Kira's final entry. He felt a strange connection to this alien girl who had died centuries before he was born. Her hope in the face of impossible odds reminded him of the best qualities of humanity. He looked around the communication room, thinking about what he had discovered. Hidden in a young girl's diary were the secrets to technology that could change everything. Time manipulation. The ability to reverse destruction and bring dead worlds back to life. Jake knew he should report this discovery to Captain Hayes immediately. This was the kind of breakthrough that could revolutionize human science. But something held him back. Kira's words echoed in his mind. Her impossible wish to see her world restored. Her belief that someday someone would be brave enough to make it happen. He saved Kira's diary to his personal computer and began to study the technical details hidden in her innocent observations. For the first time since joining the crew of the Horizon's Edge, Jake felt like he had found something worth fighting for. Not just scientific knowledge or human advancement, but the chance to fulfill a young girl's impossible dream. As he worked late into the ship's night cycle, Jake made a decision that would change everything. He was going to find a way to grant Kira's wish, no matter how impossible it seemed. Jake spent the next 3 days reading every word of Kira's diary. He read it during his meals, during his breaks, and late into the night when the rest of the crew was sleeping. Each entry gave him new insights into Zilani culture and their desperate attempts to save their dying world. Kira wrote about her daily life with the innocent eyes of a young person, but her observations contained scientific gold. She described her grandmother's work in simple terms that somehow made the complex science easier to understand. Grandmother says time is like a river that always flows forward, but she found a way to make the water flow backwards, at least in small pools. She showed me how they can make a broken flower bloom again by reversing its time. But when they tried to do it with bigger things, the river got angry and created whirlpools that destroyed everything around them. Jake translated this into scientific terms. The Zilani had developed localized temporal reversal technology, but scaling it up created dangerous space-time distortions. The larger the object they tried to affect, the more unstable the process became. He found more technical details hidden in Kira's innocent questions and observations. I asked Grandmother why the time machine needs so many numbers. She said every tiny piece of matter has to be tracked and calculated or the whole thing falls apart. She showed me rooms full of computers working on just one flower, and said they would need computers bigger than our whole city to fix something as big as a planet. Jake began to understand the scope of the problem. The Zilani had the theory and basic technology for temporal manipulation, but they lacked the computational power to safely execute large-scale reversals. Their computers, advanced as they were, simply could not handle the massive calculations required. But Jake knew something the Zilani had not. Human computer technology worked in fundamentally different ways. Where Zilani computers were precise and logical, human quantum computers used probability and uncertainty as tools. This difference might be exactly what was needed. "Jake, you look terrible," said Dr. Lisa Carter as she entered the communication room. Lisa was the ship's chief science officer, and one of Jake's closest friends on the crew. "Have you been sleeping at all?" Jake looked up from his screen, realizing he had been working for 6 straight hours without a break. His eyes were red and his hands were shaking from too much coffee. "I found something incredible, Lisa," Jake said, his voice excited but tired. "Look at this." He showed her some of Kira's diary entries explaining what he had discovered about Zilani temporal technology. Lisa read silently, her expression growing more concerned with each page. "Jake, this is fascinating research, but these people have been dead for centuries," Lisa said carefully. "Why are you so obsessed with this?" Jake turned back to his screen and brought up one of Kira's final entries. "Because she believed someone would help her someday. She had this impossible dream that her world could be restored, and she never gave up hope, even when everything was falling apart around her." Lisa read Kira's words about her wish to see her homeworld green and alive again. Despite herself, she felt moved by the young alien's hope and determination. "It's a beautiful dream, Jake, but it's just that, a dream. The Zilani technology is centuries beyond our understanding. Even if we could figure out how it works, we don't have the resources to build something like that." "But that's where you're wrong," Jake said, pulling up technical diagrams he had extracted from Kira's descriptions. The Zilani had the science figured out. They just lacked the right kind of computational power. But human quantum computers might be exactly what they needed. Jake explained his theory about how human and Zilani technologies could work together. The Zilani systems provided the temporal manipulation framework, while human computers handled the chaotic calculations that had overwhelmed the Zilani machines. Lisa studied the diagrams with growing interest. As a quantum physicist, she could see the potential in Jake's ideas. The combination of technologies might actually work, at least in theory. Even if this could work, Jake, the energy requirements would be enormous, Lisa said. We're talking about reversing the timeline of an entire planet. That would require more power than our ship produces in a year. I know it seems impossible, Jake said, but Kira believed it could be done. She never lost hope, even at the end. If a young alien girl could keep believing in impossible dreams, shouldn't we at least try? Lisa looked at the passionate expression on Jake's face and realized this had become much more than a scientific puzzle for him. He had formed an emotional connection to Kira and her story. This was dangerous territory for any scientist. Jake, you're getting too emotionally involved in this, Lisa warned. This alien girl lived centuries ago. You can't save her or grant her wishes. You need to focus on reality. But what if we could save her world? Jake asked. What if we could use temporal technology to restore the Zilani homeworld to what it was before their star died? Wouldn't that be worth trying? Lisa was quiet for a long moment, torn between scientific caution and human curiosity. She had to admit that Jake's theories were fascinating, and the potential breakthrough could revolutionize their understanding of time and space. Let me see the technical data again, Lisa said finally. If we're going to do this, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. They spent the next several hours going through Kira's diary together, extracting every piece of scientific information hidden in her innocent observations. Lisa's expertise in quantum mechanics helped Jake understand the deeper implications of the Zilani research. This is incredible, Lisa admitted as they worked. The Zilani were so close to solving temporal mechanics. If they had just thought to use quantum uncertainty as a tool instead of trying to eliminate it, they might have succeeded. So you think it could actually work? Jake asked hopefully. In theory, yes, Lisa said slowly. But the practical challenges would be enormous. We would need to completely understand both technologies, build a hybrid system from scratch, and somehow generate enough power to affect an entire planet. And that's assuming we don't accidentally tear a hole in space-time and destroy ourselves in the process. Jake nodded, understanding the risks but not willing to give up. Kira's grandmother said it would take a miracle to make the calculations work. Maybe humans are that miracle. Maybe our different way of thinking is exactly what this technology needs. Lisa looked at Jake's determined expression and felt herself being drawn into his vision. Despite all her scientific training and caution, she found herself believing that maybe, just maybe, they could make the impossible happen. If we're going to do this, we'll need help, Lisa said. This is too big for just the two of us. Jake smiled for the first time in days. I was hoping you'd say that. Jake knew exactly who he needed for the next phase of his plan. Ben Walsh was the best engineer on the horizon's edge, and more importantly, he was someone who loved solving impossible problems. If anyone could figure out how to combine human and Zilani technologies, it would be Ben. Jake found Ben in the engineering section, working on repairs to the ship's main drive system. Ben was a big man with gentle hands who could fix anything from a broken coffee maker to a quantum reactor. He looked up as Jake approached, wiping grease from his fingers. Hey Jake, what brings you down to my corner of the ship? Ben asked with a friendly smile. I need your help with something unusual, Jake said. But first I need you to promise to keep an open mind. Ben raised an eyebrow. That sounds either really interesting or really dangerous. Maybe both? Jake pulled out a portable screen and showed Ben some of Kira's diary entries. He explained how he had discovered the Zilani temporal technology hidden in a young girl's innocent observations. Ben read silently, his expression changing from curiosity to amazement. This is incredible, Jake. This girl was living through the end of her world, but she never stopped hoping for a miracle, Ben said softly. And you think we could actually make her dream come true? I think we have to try, Jake said. The Zilani had the science figured out, but they couldn't handle the computational chaos. Human technology might be the missing piece they needed. Ben studied the technical diagrams Jake had extracted from Kira's descriptions. As an engineer, he could see both the potential and the enormous challenges involved. The power requirements alone would be massive, Ben said thoughtfully. We'd need to basically rebuild our entire energy system. And that's assuming we can even figure out how to interface human and Zilani technologies. But is it possible? Jake asked. Ben was quiet for a long moment, his engineer's mind working through the problems. Maybe, he said finally. It would be the biggest challenge I've ever taken on, but maybe. The real question is whether we should try. Jake brought up Kira's final diary entry, where she wrote about her hope that someday someone would be brave enough to grant her impossible wish. Ben read the words slowly, feeling the same emotional impact that had driven Jake to pursue this project. She really believed someone would help her, Ben said quietly. Even at the end, she kept believing. And now we have the chance to prove she was right, Jake said. Ben looked at the technical challenges again, but this time with determination instead of doubt. All right, I'm in. But we're going to need more help. This is too big for just 3 people. Over the next few days, the 3 of them worked together in secret, using spare time and hidden resources to begin building their impossible machine. They started small, trying to understand how Zilani temporal fields interacted with human quantum computers. Their first breakthrough came when they realized that human neural patterns could actually guide the chaotic calculations needed for temporal manipulation. Where Zilani minds were too ordered and logical, human intuition and emotional processing provided the flexibility needed to navigate temporal paradoxes. It's like the difference between following a map and finding your way by instinct, Lisa explained as they studied their test results. The Zilani tried to map every possible variable, but temporal mechanics is too chaotic for that approach. Human minds can feel their way through the chaos. Jake was fascinated by this discovery. So humans aren't just providing the computers. We're providing a completely different way of thinking about the problem. Exactly, Ben said, looking up from the prototype interface he was building. The Zilani technology provides the framework. Human computers handle the calculations and human intuition guides the whole process. It's like we were meant to work together. Their progress was interrupted when Dr. Carter discovered their secret project. She stormed into the engineering section where they had set up their hidden workshop, her face showing a mixture of anger and concern. What exactly do you think you're doing? Lisa demanded. You're conducting unauthorized experiments with potentially dangerous alien technology. I should report all of you to Captain Hayes immediately. Jake stepped forward, knowing this moment had been inevitable. Lisa, before you do anything, please read this. He handed her Kira's complete diary, translated into perfect English. Lisa took the device reluctantly, but as she began to read, her anger slowly turned to fascination and then to something deeper. Kira's words painted a picture of a brave young person facing the end of everything she had ever known. Her love for her grandmother, her sadness at leaving her dying world, and her impossible hope that someday someone would restore what was lost. She was so young, Lisa said softly when she finished reading, and she never gave up believing. The Zilani were an advanced civilization, Jake said. They had science and technology we can barely understand. But they couldn't save themselves because they thought too rigidly. Maybe that's where humans can make the difference. Lisa looked at the prototype machine Ben had been building. It was a strange combination of human and Zilani components, held together with improvised connections and Ben's engineering genius. The risks are enormous, Lisa said. If you make a mistake with temporal mechanics, you could unravel reality itself. But if we succeed, we could bring back an entire world, Ben added. We could prove that some problems aren't unsolvable, they just need a different approach. Lisa walked around their makeshift laboratory, studying their work with her trained eye. Despite her concerns, she had to admit they had made remarkable progress. The combination of technologies was crude but showed real potential. If I help you with this insane project, we do it right, Lisa said finally. Proper safety protocols, careful testing, and we tell Captain Hayes before we try anything major. Jake felt a surge of relief and excitement. With Lisa's expertise in quantum mechanics, they finally had all the pieces they needed to make Kira's dream a reality. There's one more thing, Lisa said. We need to understand that we're not just playing with technology here. We're talking about changing the timeline of an entire world. The philosophical and ethical implications are staggering. I know, Jake said, but Kira believed it was possible. She believed someone would care enough to try. If we don't attempt this, who will? Ben nodded in agreement. Sometimes the most important things seem impossible until someone is brave enough to try them. Lisa looked at her colleagues and felt the same sense of purpose that had driven them to this point. Despite all the risks and challenges, they had a chance to do something truly extraordinary. They had a chance to grant an alien girl's impossible wish and prove that human compassion could achieve miracles. "All right," Lisa said with determination. "Let's build a time machine and bring back a dead world." How hard could it be? The team worked for weeks in secret, using every spare moment to build their temporal displacement device. They combined salvaged Zilani technology with human innovations, creating something that had never existed before. Ben's engineering skills proved invaluable as he found ways to make the incompatible technologies work together. The device they built looked like a strange sculpture made of crystal and metal. Zilani temporal field generators were wired to human quantum computers, with neural interface connections that would allow human operators to guide the process with their intuition and emotional intelligence. "The theory is sound," Lisa said as she reviewed their calculations for the 100th time. "A localized temporal field could theoretically restore a planet to a previous state in its timeline. We would essentially be reversing stellar damage and environmental collapse." Jake studied the readings from their test runs. They had successfully reversed time for small objects, making withered flowers bloom again and turning rust back into clean metal. But scaling up to planetary size would be an entirely different challenge. "The energy requirements are our biggest problem," Ben said, looking at power consumption data. "To affect an entire planet, we would need to drain our ship's reactors completely. We would be left stranded in space with no way to get home." Jake felt the weight of that reality. He was asking his friends to risk not just their lives, but their only way home for the sake of an alien girl's impossible dream. For a moment, doubt crept into his mind. "Maybe we're being foolish," Jake said quietly. "We're talking about playing with forces we barely understand, risking everything for someone who died centuries ago." Lisa looked up from her calculations. "Remember what you told me when this started? About how Kira never gave up hope even when everything was falling apart around her. Maybe that's what makes us human. We do impossible things when we're motivated by compassion." Ben nodded in agreement. "Besides, someone has to be first. Every great breakthrough in human history seemed impossible until someone was brave enough to try it." Their conversation was interrupted when Captain Scott Hayes entered their hidden workshop. The 3 team members froze as their commanding officer looked around at their unauthorized project. "So this is where my crew has been disappearing to," Captain Hayes said calmly. "Want to explain what you're building in my engineering section?" Jake stepped forward, knowing there was no point in lying now. "Sir, we've been working on a project to restore the Zilani homeworld using temporal displacement technology." Captain Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Temporal displacement? You mean time travel?" "Not exactly time travel, sir," Lisa explained. "More like reversing time for a specific location. We found the theoretical framework in an alien database, and we believe we can make it work." Captain Hayes examined their device and the technical documentation they had spread around the workshop. As a former engineer himself, he could understand enough to see the scope of what they were attempting. "This is either the most brilliant scientific breakthrough in human history, or the most dangerous thing anyone has ever built," Captain Hayes said finally. "Maybe both." Jake pulled out Kira's diary and handed it to the captain. "Sir, before you make any decisions, I'd like you to read this. It's what started this whole project." Captain Hayes read through Kira's entries, his expression softening as he learned about the young alien's hope and dreams. When he finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "She really believed someone would help her," Captain Hayes said softly. "Even at the end of her world, she kept believing in miracles." "That's why we have to try, sir," Jake said. "We have the chance to prove she was right. We can show that some problems aren't unsolvable. They just need a different approach." Captain Hayes looked at the faces of his crew members. He could see the determination and hope in their eyes, the same qualities that had driven humanity to the stars in the first place. "The risks are enormous," Captain Hayes said. "If you make a mistake, you could create a temporal paradox that unravels reality itself. And even if you succeed, we would be stranded in space with no power to get home." "We understand the risks, sir," Ben said, "but we also understand what we could accomplish. We could bring back an entire civilization's homeworld. We could prove that human compassion can achieve the impossible." Lisa added her own thoughts. "Sir, this could be humanity's chance to show that we belong among the stars not as conquerors, but as beings capable of extraordinary acts of empathy." Captain Hayes walked around their device, considering the implications of what they were proposing. As a ship's captain, his first responsibility was the safety of his crew. But as a human being, he was moved by the story of Kira and her impossible dream. "If we do this, we do it properly," Captain Hayes said finally. "Full safety protocols, emergency procedures, and a complete understanding of the consequences. I won't risk my crew on a desperate gamble." Jake felt a surge of hope and gratitude. "You're going to let us try?" "I'm going to help you try," Captain Hayes corrected. "This is too important for just 4 people. We'll need the entire crew working together if we're going to pull off a miracle." Over the next few days, Captain Hayes briefed the rest of the crew on their mission. The response was mixed. Some crew members thought it was too dangerous, while others were excited by the challenge. But when they read Kira's diary for themselves, most of them were won over by her story. "It's not about the science," said Chief Navigator Ryan Park after reading Kira's final entries. "It's about proving that hope isn't foolish. It's about showing that compassion can move mountains, or in this case, restore dead worlds." Dr. Amy Foster, the ship's medical officer, raised practical concerns. "What if we succeed but create a temporal paradox? What if changing the past has consequences we can't predict?" "Then we deal with those consequences," Jake said. "But I'd rather live in a universe where we tried to help than one where we played it safe and did nothing." As they prepared for their attempt, Jake spent long hours reading Kira's diary again. Her words had started this journey, and they continued to inspire him as he faced the greatest challenge of his life. "I know my wish seems impossible," Kira had written in one of her final entries. "But impossible things happen every day. Love conquers hatred, hope defeats despair, and sometimes strangers become heroes just because they care. I believe someone will help us someday. I have to believe." Jake closed the diary and looked around at his crewmates preparing for their impossible mission. Kira had been right to hope. Sometimes strangers did become heroes just because they cared enough to try. The Horizon's Edge arrived at the coordinates of the former Zilani homeworld after 3 days of travel. What they found was heartbreaking. A dead, burnt planet orbited a bloated red giant star that had consumed everything in its path. The world that had once been home to billions of Zilani was now nothing but scorched rock and poisoned. "Atmosphere, sensors confirm the planet is completely lifeless," reported Navigator Ryan Park. "Surface temperature is over 800 degrees. No atmosphere capable of supporting life." Jake stared at the dead world on the main screen, thinking about Kira's descriptions of her green and beautiful homeworld. It was hard to imagine that this burned rock had once been covered with blue oceans and silver cities. "The star is in its red giant phase," observed Dr. Foster. "According to our calculations, it started expanding about 350 years ago. That matches the timeline in Kira's diary." Captain Hayes turned to his crew. "This is our last chance to change our minds. Once we begin the temporal displacement process, there's no going back. We'll either succeed in restoring this world, or we'll drain our power reserves and be stranded here." "I'm not changing my mind," Jake said firmly. Kira believed this was possible. She kept hoping even when everything seemed lost. We owe it to her to try. The rest of the crew nodded their agreement. They had all read Kira's diary, and her story had touched something deep in their hearts. This had become more than a scientific experiment. It was a mission of mercy across time and space. "All right then," Captain Hayes said. "Take us into position, Mr. Park. Ben, start the power transfer to the temporal device. Lisa, begin the quantum calculations. Jake, prepare the neural interface." The ship moved closer to the dead planet as the crew made their final preparations. The temporal displacement device hummed to life, its strange combination of human and Zilani technologies creating patterns of light that had never been seen before. "Power levels at maximum," Ben reported from his engineering station. "All systems are functioning within normal parameters. We have enough energy for one attempt. Quantum computers are online," Lisa announced. "Initial calculations are stable, but the complexity will increase exponentially once we begin affecting larger masses." Jake sat down at the neural interface, placing his hands on the control surfaces that would allow his human intuition to guide the temporal field. The device connected directly to his nervous system, letting him feel the chaotic forces they were about to unleash. "Neural interface is active," Jake reported. "I can sense the temporal field generators. It feels like standing at the edge of a waterfall made of time." Captain Hayes took a deep breath. "Begin temporal displacement. All stations monitor for anomalies. The device activated with a sound like singing crystal. Waves of temporal energy swept out from their ship toward the dead planet, causing the very fabric of space and time to ripple and bend. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The planet continued to orbit its dying star as lifeless as before, but then Jake began to feel something through the neural interface. The temporal field was taking hold, reaching backward through time to find the planet's earlier states. "I can sense it," Jake said, his voice filled with wonder. "I can feel the planet's history there. There's the moment when the star began to expand, and before that, I can see when it was alive." Through the neural link, Jake experienced flashes of the planet's past. He saw green forests and blue oceans, silver cities reaching toward the sky, and millions of Zilani living in harmony with their world. He saw Kira as a young child, playing in gardens that had been dead for centuries. "Power consumption is higher than expected," Ben warned. "The temporal field is requiring more energy to maintain stability." "Quantum calculations are becoming chaotic," Lisa added. "The system is struggling to track all the variables." Jake gritted his teeth and focused harder on the neural interface. This was where human intuition was supposed to make the difference. Where Zilani logic would break down trying to calculate infinite variables, human instinct could navigate by feel. "I've got it," Jake said. "The chaos has patterns. I can guide us through it." The temporal field intensified and impossible things began to happen. The planet's surface started to cool as its timeline reversed. The poisoned atmosphere began to clear, replaced by clean air from centuries past. Dead oceans started to fill with water that sparkled with life. "It's working," Captain Hayes said in amazement. "The planet is actually reversing through time." But the process was more difficult than they had anticipated. Temporal distortions began to affect their ship, causing instruments to malfunction and creating dangerous gravitational fluctuations. "Hull stress is reaching critical levels," Ben reported, sweat beading on his forehead as he fought to keep their systems functional. "The temporal field is affecting our ship's structure." "Quantum computers are overheating," Lisa announced. "We're pushing them beyond their design limits." Jake felt the strain through the neural interface. Guiding the temporal field was like trying to steer a hurricane with his bare hands. Every moment required enormous concentration and willpower. "I can see Kira's time period," Jake said through gritted teeth. "The planet is almost back to when she was alive. Just a little more." The star itself began to change, contracting from a bloated red giant back to the young, bright yellow star it had been in Kira's time. This was the most dangerous part of the process, as stellar-scale temporal manipulation threatened to tear apart the fabric of space-time itself. "Temporal field is destabilizing," Lisa warned. "We're approaching the limits of what the technology can handle." Jake pushed harder, drawing on every ounce of human determination and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. In his mind, he could hear Kira's voice from her diary entries encouraging him to keep going. "I believe someone will help us someday," her voice seemed to whisper. "I believe in miracles." With a final surge of effort, Jake guided the temporal field to completion. The planet's timeline snapped into place like a rubber band releasing its tension. Where moments before there had been a dead world, now there was a living planet covered with green forests, blue oceans, and a bright yellow star shining down from above. "Temporal displacement complete," Lisa announced in a voice filled with awe. "The planet has been successfully restored to its state approximately 350 years ago." Through the neural interface, Jake experienced something incredible. For just a moment, he felt a connection across time itself. He saw Kira as a young girl, running through the green fields of her restored homeworld. She looked up at the sky as if sensing something, smiled and whispered words that somehow reached across the centuries. "Thank you," she said to the stars above. "Thank you for believing in impossible dreams." Jake disconnected from the neural interface, tears streaming down his face. They had done it. They had actually done it. Kira's impossible wish had come true. "Power reserves are completely depleted," Ben reported. "We're running on emergency batteries only." "It doesn't matter," Captain Hayes said, staring at the restored world before them. "We did something that will be remembered forever. We proved that human compassion can achieve the impossible." Over the following days, as they waited for a rescue ship to arrive, they watched the restored Zilani homeworld through their telescopes. They saw weather patterns forming, oceans currents flowing, and even the first signs of cities beginning to appear as the planet's timeline stabilized. The temporal displacement created a stable loop, Lisa explained. The planet exists now as it did in Kira's time. Any Zilani who survived the evacuation can return home if they choose to. Jake kept Kira's diary with him as a reminder of what they had accomplished. Her words had started an impossible journey that ended with the restoration of an entire world. Her hope had been justified, her faith in miracles proven correct. On their final day before the rescue ship arrived, Jake opened the diary one last time and read Kira's final entry. I know my wish seems impossible, but impossible things happen every day. Love conquers hatred, hope defeats despair, and sometimes strangers become heroes just because they care. I believe someone will help us someday. I have to believe. Jake smiled as he closed the diary. Kira had been right about everything. Sometimes strangers did become heroes. Impossible things did happen, and hope really could move mountains. Or in this case, restore dead worlds and grant the wishes of alien girls who had never lost faith in miracles. The restored Zilani homeworld spun peacefully in space, alive and green and beautiful, exactly as Kira had dreamed it would be. Her impossible wish had been granted by humans who had accidentally read her diary and discovered that sometimes the greatest scientific breakthroughs come not from cold logic, but from the simple desire to make someone else's dream come true.